Hey guys, JV here sharing a few thoughts about Andromeda's development, now that the studio responsible for it is officially closing. In case you missed it, Bioware Montreal is being merged with EA Motive and will cease to exist once the process is done. While it's not the first time I've seen these claims, this event caused another massive wave of speculation surrounding Andromeda's development. In this video, I'm going to address the idea that SJW ruined the game, because I simply don't believe it. As always, if you like what I do here and want to see more, be sure to subscribe. Now, before we get into this, I wanted to share a little disclaimer at the beginning of the video, and it's that I don't believe most people pushing these ideas would bet their life on them. I think they're just offhand comments made on the internet, not a ton of weight behind them. I think the Mass Effect community is a passionate one, and as a fandom, that can be a good thing and a bad thing. That being said, I think a lot of the claims being made are in a guilty until proven innocent mindset, not the other way around. They're based on intuition and feeling, and correlation equals causation, where it may not necessarily be the case. And for the most part, from what I can tell, these claims being made are from people who did not like Andromeda and want those who did like it to know about it. They're very vocal and very aggressive. And please let me know if you're an exception to that rule, if you believe that SJW affected the game but you still liked Andromeda, let me know, because I really haven't seen that thus far. The opinions I'm going to share in this video are just that, they're opinions. So don't get personally offended if we disagree. I'm not trying to personally attack you by telling you how I feel. And heads up, I'll be speculating as well, but on an innocent until proven guilty mindset, not the other way around. And I'll tell you what I think went on with the development, but I won't pretend that I know it to be verifiably correct, because I can't. I don't have the evidence. Finally, if you're watching this video and you're wondering, okay, if it was an SJW, then what happened? This is what I think most likely happened. The most reasonable assumption behind a lot of these issues that I'm going to discuss is the awful development cycle. Mismanagement, changing directions far too late, having writers on too late, having to rush the game to meet a ship date, forcing the game to be in Frostbite, which wasn't, too great for an RPG. We've seen that from Dragon Age Inquisition. Those are realistic challenges that most studios face, plain and simple. And I think if you're going to attribute a lot of these issues to something, that's the more likely reason. Just to clarify, the main claim that we're addressing today is that Mass Effect Andromeda, the game, was ruined by SJW at Bioware Montreal, and that the studio actively pushed a socio-political agenda. And from what I've seen, usually this claim doesn't explain why in a logical sense. It's just that they want to push this agenda. It's not for business purposes, it's not to make more money, it's just that it did happen. The points people bring up when defending this position is that Bioware purposefully made females ugly, they purposefully planted a transgender character in there to push their agenda. Adding Jaw's romance after launch is another reason they're SJW. And then finally, Manveer Air. Don't know if I'm saying that right, but that one developer that probably shouldn't have said certain things on social media. Those are the main points people bring up. We're going to address those one by one, but first, here's a little context about Bioware. Bioware has been a historically progressive studio based out of Canada that actively participates in things like pride parades. Many of its games that have been released over many years feature non-traditional romance options before a lot of other games in the industry. Long story short, whether it affected development or not, nobody was blindsided by Bioware's overall stance. It's nothing new. And so pretending that Bioware has suddenly become something that they weren't before is intellectually dishonest. These themes didn't become an issue until a Bioware game didn't succeed. Mass Effect Andromeda, whether you liked it or not, failed to meet the expectations of a lot of people out there. And now this is a talking point because people are angry. Let's start off with the idea that Bioware purposefully decided that females should be ugly for whatever reason to push their agenda. And I just have to ask a lot of questions about this claim because I don't think a lot of this gets addressed when people bring this up. I have to ask, who within Bioware decided females should be ugly? Who's the one person or group of people? Did the art direction team take over and remodel characters for this purpose? Were they attractive before and then they decided, hey, we need to make them more ugly? Did the higher ups decide females were too attractive? What is to be gained by making unattractive females in a video game? Is there a market for pandering towards progressive people who don't want attractive females? If you actually believe that there is a systematic effort to make females ugly, then why? Who did it and why did they do it? Additionally, you have to answer the question, why are PB and Cora's nude scenes so graphic? their models are particularly generous in certain areas, there's no denying that. They are very shapely. And if females were supposed to be ugly and that was an effort made by the studio internally, then why are these characters shaped like this? Surely if there was an effort to downplay the beauty of females, then they would not have made these models and they wouldn't be in the game as they are now. And along that same line, if SJW was the goal, why don't LGBT scenes get the same treatment? This has been talked about in the community a lot, and people have voiced their complaints like, why are the gay and lesbian scenes not nearly as animated or as thought out as some of the heterosexual scenes? Because you can't have it both ways here. BioWare can't both be pandering to a crowd of heterosexual males who want to see some very graphic, animated females, while also pushing an SJW agenda. Those two paths do not exist in a reality where they also failed to give LGBT scenes the same treatment that those heterosexual scenes clearly got. I know there was a lot of backlash about Korra and her haircut. People thought she was masculine and that was part of this agenda, but I have to look back at the original trilogy and ask, what about Jack? Korra, to me, is more feminine than Jack ever was, and on purpose. She's a different character, but certainly more feminine than Jack was, and somehow Jack was not an issue in the same way that Korra is. I think a more than fair criticism for the overall design choice for females is to look at Frostbite as an engine and question its ability to produce character models in the way that Unreal Engine did for the original trilogy. And we actually have proof for this one, looking at Dragon Age Inquisition, which was also created using the Frostbite engine. Female character models in Inquisition and Andromeda are very similar, and beauty is in the eyes of the beholder. Maybe you thought character models in both of these games were better looking than the original trilogy, but it's a point of comparison here, and we can't ignore this because once again, we do have proof here. We can compare these games. Finally, if you think there's a difference between male and female character models, I do think that Scott Ryder was given more attention than Sarah Ryder for whatever reason, but look at a lot of the male character models. They are very doughy face, not a lot of detail, not a lot of thought put into them, procedurally generated to a certain degree. This is not something that just affects female characters in Andromeda. Next, let's look at Hanley Abrams, who is the poorly handled and fairly insignificant transgender character in the game, who came out and told you that she used to be a man far too easily. On the surface, the issue was that this was unrealistic. This is not how a transgender person would act in the real world, and so BioWare came in and switched the flow of dialogue to correct this issue. She won't come out and tell you that unless you really do dig in and ask her. The claim of this being part of an SJW agenda ranges from BioWare's trying to pander by adding a transgender character in the first place, or BioWare is trying to pander by fixing this character. And there was really no middle ground here. People that did not want to see a transgender character in the game simply didn't want to. And I have to ask, as a progressive studio, which BioWare is and has shown in the past, what do you expect? Just not put the character in the game in the first place? And also, this is a completely optional character. It's not that Hanley Abrams was like Director Addison or someone that you had to encounter and talk to. You didn't have to encounter her whatsoever. So to pretend that the inclusion of this character in the game whatsoever was an attempt by BioWare to push their agenda and shove it down your throat, there was no way to avoid it, is completely dishonest. I think the fairest criticism here is to point out how it was mishandled from launch. If BioWare is truly a progressive studio, how did they not know that this wasn't realistic in the first place? And some people will say, oh, it's because they were trying to pander. And if you believe that, you also have to believe that BioWare thought they were caught red-handed and actually dedicated time to fixing it in the first place, I guess, to pander further. It's kind of like mental gymnastics at this point. Next is Jaal's Romance, which was added into the game after launch so that male gay writers could have a squad mate to romance. The claim was that this was another move to push a certain agenda out of BioWare, an SJW agenda to please certain players and certain crowds. The better point here would be to ask why this wasn't possible in the first place. Why wasn't there on launch? Because looking at BioWare's track record, this is nothing new. Every single Dragon Age game, every single Mass Effect game, they all had male squad mates or companions where if you were a male character in that game, you could absolutely romance them on launch. It is so funny how the narrative has switched and people pushing this idea don't even address it. They don't even talk about it because on launch, the LGBT community and Mass Effect fans that are used to a certain expectation for these romance options were like, hey, why doesn't male writer have a male romance option as a squad mate? Wouldn't that mean that BioWare is pushing an anti-SJW agenda, one that doesn't support those different communities that want inclusivity in their video games? Again, you have to pick one of the two. BioWare is not both anti-SJW and SJW at the same time. Now let's talk about Bioware Air, the openly racist developer that worked on Andromeda in previous Mass Effect games. And the strange theory about this is that his opinions, namely being anti-white, tweeting pictures of himself drinking something from a mug that says white tears, the theory is that this one man had such a force that he was able to affect the whole of Andromeda's development. This one is just silly, ridiculous. Like, there aren't plenty of white people in Andromeda. Like, the two main characters of the game aren't white, and he decided to work on that game. Like, there aren't plenty of people working at Bioware Montreal who are white as well. Because this guy has such strong opinions, people forget. They get caught up in the shock value and forget to look at the game and ask, what is the end result of this guy not liking white people? Is there any active suppression of white people in Mass Effect Andromeda? Because if there is, please forward it to me. However, what is fair is to wonder why a company as progressive as Bioware would want someone like that around. And maybe that points to the inner workings and questions about mismanagement, some of the reports we've read about what's really going on. Bioware himself has made several different tweets about it on Twitter, being very vague, of course, but also saying, this was going on. I'm so glad I got out of there. But his tweets do not point to SJW being the reason for that. And he's not there anymore. He clearly had some issues with the company, but assigning that to SJW just to further your point doesn't do anything but weaken it. To close out the video, I wanted to share some overarching points about SJW apparently ruining the game, and this is something I see over and over. It's the claim that Montreal wasted resources pushing this agenda. From where I stand, there are many leaps in logic on this one, because it is such a thin accusation with such little evidence that it's hard to even back this up. Like, it takes a monumental amount of time to add a trans character with 10 lines of dialogue that you don't even have to talk to, that's completely optional. No, it doesn't. Not like how long it took to design the combat system or to write the story or do anything else. We talked about 4 different claims because those are the only ones that exist. It's not like this agenda could have affected the combat or the exploration or the design of the Tempest. Simply put, if you're going to make these claims, then don't ignore literally everything else that is going on. Do not ignore BioWare's track record in history. Do not ignore them as a studio and what their stances are. And don't act like this is something new, because it's not. I'd just like to point out that this far into the video, we didn't talk about any other major game mechanics that could have affected this game negatively. Mass Effect is known for its storytelling and narrative, its characters, its combat, its overall universe, etc. I mean, we could have talked about a dialogue system, exploration, the size of its maps and worlds, quest design, writing, its animations, the Frostbite engine in general, how this game works as a new chapter in the overall, franchise, whether the game was rushed or not, the effect that EA may or may not have had on this game. None of that reasonable stuff. Instead, we talked about this conspiracy theory based on intuition that supposedly someone planted a seed that grew and infected the entirety of the game in Bioware Montreal and Bioware as a whole. The post-mortem Mass Effect conversation is being dominated. It's being drowned out by claims made on intuition and conjecture. Even after we have investigative journalism and reports about development troubles, many are pointing to pandering and pushing an agenda for the reasons why Andromeda did not succeed. To those who felt affected by these themes, what should you expect in future Dragon Age or Mass Effect games? The answer is gay and lesbian romances, progressive ideas, females with short haircuts, whatever you found to offend you personally, that's going to be in the future games. You know why? Because they've been there since the beginning. That's it for me, so turning over to you guys, do you believe that SJW affected Andromeda's development, and why? I really want to stress the and why because I want to have a legitimate conversation here. I want to know what you think. I want to know why you think it. Please share in the comment section below. If you stayed till the end and enjoyed the video, click the like button and subscribe for more content. Check out my latest videos by clicking the links on screen. Follow me on Twitter and Facebook so you don't miss another video. Sign up with Juniper to receive exclusive discounts on shirts, hoodies, and more at the JV merch store. Click the link for more details. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll talk to you next time.